As the mayor of the town of Clayton, I'd like to call this special joint meeting of the Clayton Town Council and the Planning Board to order. And I will turn the floor over to the Planning Board Chairman so that she may call her meeting to order.
It being 6 o'clock on September 22nd, I call this joint town council and planning board meeting to order as well. Back to the mayor.
Thank you. First of all, thank you everybody for your time and for the collaboration to meet tonight. First time since I've been the mayor that this has happened, and I'm pretty excited about the opportunity for all of us to be under one roof to gain a little bit of better understanding and further education. So we're going to begin with the first item on the agenda, which is a comprehensive growth plan, and review the public engagement to date. And I'm going to turn the floor over to our Economic Development Director, Patrick Pierce.
Thank you. Thank you all. I didn't realize this was such a momentous occasion, the first time everyone come together, so that's great. So I appreciate you taking time out of your schedules to do this here and hold this special meeting as we have been working on this growth plan here. Well, as you will look at the calendar, you know, we're looking at a schedule that's hoping to have this put forward for approval here within the next couple months here. Really, this effort's been underway for for almost a year and a half now, and we've got great public participation in the survey that that went out. We've had a fantastic steering committee. Some of the members are here tonight that really helped to guide this plan here, and I think it's a really great update to the strategic plan that we had in 2015. What I'd say then is obviously lots of growth has happened, lots of things have occurred here in Clayton, which is fantastic, and really what we want to do is kind of a goal for that plan is really to address some of the key characteristics that Jake with Stewart will lay out here. So make some of the key updates that need to happen, but also set the table for some other future plans that in the coming months and years that think that we need to consider as we look to make sure that we stay ahead of that growth and are making good plans going forward. Another question just to answer: why is the Economic Development Director doing this? Well, in addition to my boss asking me to do it, but really all of this is economic development. If we can't move people on our roads, if we don't have industrial and commercial land to be able to attract employers to and jobs to, if we can't flush toilets and people aren't safe in the community and we don't have the resources for that, we don't have good economic development here. So it's very important. I've been working closely with our new planning director, Ben Howell, on this, and we'll continue to throughout this process. So that's why I'm here. That's why I'm doing this, and appreciate all of your help here. I'm going to hand it over to Jake Petroski, who's with Stewart. He's been continuity throughout this whole process here and really help guide us on the consulting front. Let him run through some slides here, and really what we want to get to at the end is address questions you may have there, and then also pose a few questions for discussion, and really tee this plan up for the planning board to consider in more depth at their future meetings and for town council when it makes it there. So that's really the goal tonight. Thank you all, and with that I will hand it over to Jake.
All right, thank you, Patrick. Hello, everyone. Thanks for taking time out of your evening to join us here tonight. We're talking about the future of Clayton. And my name is Jake Petroski. I work with Stewart, longtime resident of Eastern Wake County. I actually helped out with the last growth plan update when I was at Land Design a number of years ago. So really excited about being able to participate in this update and talk more about the future of Clayton with you all. The agenda, we'll talk a little bit just about the background of the project, including public engagement, that sort of thing. Then get into some highlights of the major recommendations, and then talk about schedule and moving forward, and open and close it with a discussion of what are some of you all's priorities, and be thinking about those as we go through the presentation. And also think about actions what is an action that we can do to move forward and address those priorities really in the next 1, 2, or 5 years, because that's really where I want to see the discussion go later on this evening. Right now, I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Allison Evans, and she's going to go through a few slides, and then I'll see you all in a few.
Hi everyone, Allison Evans. I'm with Stuart. I've been with Jake on this project since it kicked off last spring. So I just want to walk you through a little bit of the background of the project, what we're hoping to achieve, and a little bit of what we've heard from the community so far. Of course, public engagement is essential to making a plan that reflects what the community wants and desires. So we've been doing that in a number of ways. Early on in the project, we did some stakeholder interviews with different essentially focus group conversations from different parties around town, parks and economic development, housing, town services, and then we kicked off our community survey, which was probably reached the largest number of people. We got about 1,600 responses on that one. It ran throughout fall 2020. You can see this is an example of what community feedback in this graph, what do you value most in a community, and it's all things Clayton exhibits already, and everyone just wants to enhance it, that traditional active downtown, the environmental preservation, and the attractive streets and public spaces. And so you'll hear more about how we're going to address those desires. As public meetings, those occurred last fall, almost a year ago. We had one in person here at the community center, and then one virtual for those who either weren't able to make it or didn't want to make it out because of COVID. And we'll be hosting another public meeting here this time on October 7th to run that draft plan by the community and get some feedback from them on the final product. And so what is the comp plan? What are we doing here? It's a strategic plan for the town. We all know it's not an ordinance. It's not new rules. Will help guide bodies like you when making decisions for programming and investment 10 to 20 years in the future. This is an update of that one Jake mentioned earlier that was written in 2015 based on all of the changes that Clayton is seeing right now. The future land use map doesn't quite capture the amount of growth we're seeing and what we're seeing on the ground. Some policies needed to be clarified to better direct the bodies that they concern, and we needed to update the implementation to reflect how Clayton is governing itself right now. So speaking to that growth I mentioned earlier, these are based on census numbers. The 2020 number just came out a couple months ago, 26,000. Clayton is already over. That is a 63% increase from 2010, which is quite a number, and that's just within the municipal limits. And if we project this number out, this amount of growth, Clayton could be over 50,000 people in 20 years. We all know growth doesn't happen limitless into the future, but that 50,000 number could be what the town is looking at. So it's best to prepare now. Just to support that, Clayton is looking to house that many people. There are 6,900 homes in development or going through the approval process right now. Based on the average household number, that's could be over 17,000 people just in those new homes, in addition to what's already existing. So this growth plan has taken that growth into account and what we heard from the community, and it has a similar structure to the old plan. And it's based on a vision. This vision was largely drawn from the community feedback, and one of our steering committee members actually really strung it all together for us. But what the community wants and what they want to see Clayton in 20 years is they want a thriving, diverse community. But they want to keep their small town ambiance. That's why people are moving here. That's why they love Clayton. They see it as a home for families with quality housing and easy access to shopping, dining, parks, and schools. And they also want that vibrant downtown with growing businesses and small businesses, local businesses, to visit not too far from where they live. So to address this vision and help build this vision, this plan is looking at land use and housing, arts and culture, transportation, parks, economic growth, in addition to a few other sections. Recommendations recommendations are captured like this. Within each section, there will be a goal. This will be the broad vision goal that the community wants to achieve, followed by a policy. That will be what is guiding the planning board and the town council when you all are making decisions. And they also list some strategies under them. Those are the more actionable items that will help bring these goals and that vision to life. So enough about the format. I'm going to turn it back over to Jake, and he can break down what we are recommending.
Thanks. So when we get into recommendations, these are the highlights. Hopefully you'll have had some time to spend with the document and have some time on your calendar moving forward. I'm gonna hit the highlights and talk about land use and then some of the other topics. This map before you is the future land use map from the 2015 growth plan. So you can see that there, you can kind of see where downtown is. That's the darker red area in the middle. You can see the employment area out towards Powhatan Road and Caterpillar and that area in blue. You can also see some different colors of yellow, darker yellows fading to lighter greens. Those are kind of the more residential areas. So one of our really important charges with this effort was updating this future land use map. A lot has happened since 2015 in terms of development, but also in terms of changes in available infrastructure and services and things that influence what areas are appropriate for development and also what kinds of development can and should go in different places. So this was a really big update. So this was the old plan, and I'm going to change to the new plan there. I'm going to go back and forth a few times, and then I'm going to talk about some highlights. So the old plan and the new plan. And some of the highlights of the changes that we made, we did make some minor changes to the neighborhood and community centers. Those are the commercial and mixed use areas, the pink areas and the hatched red areas, based on development approvals, but also potential for different commercial centers. One of the goals was to provide convenient access to different areas of town that are growing. So some of those are on the ground, some of those we know are coming, and some are anticipated. Also the employment center, that blue area, largely centered around 70 business, is where many of your major employers exist now in the planning area. Some are inside the city limits, some are outside the city limits, but this plan is for the whole ETJ. That's your extraterritorial jurisdiction. That's where you have planning and zoning authority, and that's what we cover with this. So one of the keys is identifying areas where there could be future economic growth in terms of non-residential employment-bearing development, so that that could add to the tax base, so it can keep residential taxes low and also provide local jobs. So that was one change to this area. And then also areas for residential growth. You can see some changes in those yellow and orange areas, and those were largely driven by working with public works staff and looking at utility availability and where utilities are available now or could be available now that were not available in the 2015 plan. There's also some changes downtown where we customize some of the future land use recommendations really to better reflect the character of different parts of downtown. So that was key, and I do have a downtown map in the presentation and over here if you want to take a closer look at that. And also, one other big change was you can see some green areas, dark green ribbons pop up between those two maps. And one thing that we did was show floodplains as open space on this map. Not public open space, but it will. Those are really high priority to be conserved, and we really don't want a lot of development in the floodplain because it sets us up for impacts down the line. And that's also setting expectations with this plan, because it's one thing if we have an area on a color of this map, and developers or landowners will come to staff and think that they can do a certain thing, right? They think that it's in line with the land use plan. So that's reflecting where existing regulations and best practices really say we really don't want development in that floodplain. So that's an important change too. So looking at the residential character areas, these are kind of a short description of those residential character areas. The agricultural and rural residential is the lowest density category. And there, some of that could be served by utilities, but a lot of it's kind of on the fringe to where we don't know if it will be served with utilities in the next 10 or 20 years. Nonetheless, we are calling for, there can be development there. So either large lots, if it's not on utilities, or conservation subdivisions where you cluster development away from natural resources, and could have some smaller lots. Some flexibility there is recommended. Lower density residential, the yellow category, that's your suburban character, about 3 dwelling units per acre. And then we do want some open space there. And then the medium density residential, these are your more, medium density neighborhoods that have some mix of housing, but not too much. And then your higher density category where it is typically served well with utilities and also transportation. So those are kind of the residential categories. And I'll break this up, talk a little bit about residential development, and then talk a little bit about non-residential development and employment centers. So some of the land use recommendations really get into how we can encourage a scale of new development, also design of new development that is something that will add value to the town. So we focus on high quality design details in both commercial and residential development in a policy in the plan, and have some examples of what those are. Also, we tackled the issue of housing variety in this plan. One thing that we heard is that, there is a need for a mix of housing, but it should be done in the right places. And it should have good design and be designed well to where it will hold its value and contributes to the value of town. So we are suggesting some changes to the Unified Development Code to improve the design, but also allow things that make sense go where they make sense. So there's some ways to encourage housing variety. One way that Huntersville does it, for instance, is they actually require, but you can encourage or require, a mix of lot sizes in new development over a certain size, to where you get some different price points in a development. That's a relatively easy thing to do, and it's something that is kind of low-hanging fruit. So that's a low-hanging fruit. One of the more a recommendation would require a little bit more discussion and change is going to a tiered approach to attached housing. Right now, your current approach requires special use permits for most zoning districts, except for the open space subdivision option where you can have up to 50%. We're proposing a slightly different approach to allow some attached housing in some areas where it makes sense, allow a percentage of attached housing in some other areas that's based on future land use map or zoning districts, and is more appropriate for the context of the area. So instead of just allowing 50% with the open space subdivision, allowing some process, maybe it's conditional zoning or something like that, that allows a tiered approach. In low density, you can have a little bit, and medium density, you can have a little bit more, and higher density, you can have more. This will require some more discussion and some updates to the Unified Development Code. So this plan doesn't change your Unified Development Code. This is just talking about an issue that needs to be addressed in some way, and we're providing options and some ideas. So that's important. Open space. We heard a lot about environmental preservation and some concerns from folks that participate in the plan, concerned about the design of new development and mass grading and what it can do to water quality and that sort of thing. So one thing that we can do to make new development fit a little bit better with existing development that might have larger lots or that sort of thing is encouraging more open space in new development. development. And this is not in every development. In some areas, you don't really want a whole lot of open space because it's some of your best quality land. It's located close to downtown or that sort of thing. But in some areas, we do want to encourage a little bit more open space than is currently required. Right now, in conventional subdivisions, your base zoning district, you don't require any open space. You do have an open space subdivision option that is a optional route, and that requires 12% open space. Our recommendation is to consider a minimum open space requirement for base zoning districts, like 10%, that's a modest amount. Then use that open space subdivision as an incentive, because there's a lot of flexibility on lot size in there, and also we're allowing some attached housing in there as well. So you could require a little bit more open space than 12% in that option. It could be based on future land use, character area, or some other zoning district, that sort of thing. Also, some incentives for tree preservation is something that's encouraged. And what we're looking for is quality open space that protects the key natural features on the site, but also provides a recreational amenity. And that could be, pocket parks, could be greenways and trails, that sort of thing. That's going to add value in the long term to that subdivision. Open space has shown to increase property values, also reduce development costs if you cluster development. And then also it can relax some of the burden on your Parks and Recs department. So that's important. So talking about another key future land use character area, the employment center. These are locations that are prime for economic development. They have access to major transportation corridors and rail. They are appropriate for large-scale employment uses, and you all have been successful in recruiting those in the recent past. So they can also have limited small-scale commercial or other commercial uses to support workers, and as long as they don't conflict with the primary use, which is that employment uses. So our recommendations for these areas, and these dovetail a lot with your strategic economic development plan. But in employment centers, we really want to encourage a mix of non-residential uses. So that could include manufacturing and warehouse and office and research and development. But we want to discourage residential subdivisions in prime industrial locations, including larger parcels and employment centers with great access to roads and rail. So, that is something that is a long-term plan for these areas that really is targeting reserving some of our best areas for this type of development to improve our tax base and that sort of thing. Supporting downtown is also a really key part of economic development. Downtown is an economic engine for the town of Clayton and has been for a while, and it continues to grow. It's really impressive to see the strides that has happened in the ecosystem of downtown, just the diversity of new businesses, and that's something that you all really should celebrate. Following an update, the strategic economic development plan is important. Patrick wouldn't let us produce the plan without a recommendation for that. And then also continuing marketing, branding, and promotional efforts, because they've been really successful in elevating the perception of Clayton over the course of the last 10 years or so. So downtown, we could talk a lot about downtown, but I'm just going to touch on a few highlights here. So there's three main character areas on the future land use map for downtown. One is the downtown core, really Main Street and properties fronting Main Street. This is our shopfront district. We really want to focus on form of new development along that section, but offer some flexibility in terms of reuse of buildings and encouraging that, and also strategic infill development. Downtown support area, that's kind of the pink area on the borders of that dark maroon area, which is the downtown core. And this is a flexible district. There was only two districts in the previous plan, the downtown core and the downtown support. So this downtown support didn't really change too much. It's a flexible district. It allows some mix of uses, retail, office, and also some higher density residential. But then the new character area, which is the downtown neighborhood, is really meant to identify areas that are mostly single-family residential in nature. and really have a lot of our more historic homes and neighborhoods, and there can be some flexibility for infill development. But we want it to look and feel and still have the same scale as the existing development there. And there's just some arrows. Some of the recommendations related to downtown. Overall, we want to promote quality adaptive reuse and infill development while preserving historic character of this area. We want to reinforce the form of development. In order to do that and implement the future land use plan, we really do need to consider updates to the downtown overlay district and zoning downtown. I think it's time. The overlay district has been in place for a while, but things have changed downtown, and also our understanding of kind of how downtown fits together is evolving too. So some updates to that. This plan doesn't do that, but it suggests some ways it could. One of those is looking at the active ground floor requirement. And is that necessary along all of Main Street? Maybe we revisit that and allow some more flexibility, especially on the edges. Continue the facade grant program. That's been really successful. Support the Downtown Development Association and coordinate with the chamber and their efforts. And consider revisions to the development review and approval process. We want development to come downtown, and we've had some successful examples like the Stevenson building, and making it easy to do what is good for the town and makes sense for the town and supports downtown is something we want to do. And we don't know what those revisions look like. We have a couple options and things to look at in the plan, but it's going to be a conversation that moves forward, and hopefully we can continue that conversation after the adoption of this plan. Promoting and incentivizing residential development and mixed-use projects is important. What makes a great downtown is not buildings, it's not streets, it's not parking, it's people. And it's people there during different hours of the day to support different kinds of businesses and create an active downtown. And one key is having people that live in and near downtown, so it's not active during the day when people are at work and dead at night. So, people say a 24-hour downtown. Well, here it's probably like an 18-hour downtown is what we're looking for, right? We're looking for something that's, a little bit more balanced and also has people living, working, playing, shopping, creating downtown is what we're going for. And taking an active role in historic preservation. That's something that cannot be left out because you all do have some really signature historic landmarks downtown, and understanding what the town can do and being proactive about preserving those and keeping them a part of downtown Clayton is important. Another thing is just pedestrian safety and comfort. Prioritizing street maintenance and sidewalks and crossing improvements is something that is important. We had a downtown walking tour as part of the plan development, and it's really important to do that, just to see it from the ground level. And I think the best measure of pedestrian comfort is a mom with a stroller. How is it for them downtown? And sections of downtown are great, and you all have been proactive and doing some maintenance on some curb cuts and making those ADA accessible and that sort of thing, and that's good. But continuing that, focusing on crossings that are different, pedestrian actuated signals, giving pedestrians a little bit more space where you can. I think that's what we're talking about there. Plan improvements for Main Street and parallel roadways, looking at how we can improve parking, increase parking through partnerships is important. Also, if we're looking at these street upgrades, thinking about the utility upgrades that need to happen along with that, including undergrounding power lines is something we need to be thinking about. And that's a long-term plan. It's going to be expensive, but it's something that we want to talk about in the plan. Improving wayfinding as well. You all have the Mountains of Sea Trail that goes right through downtown. That's why this picture of the Swamp Rabbit is relevant. Getting folks either on foot or on bikes to downtown and through downtown and to our shops, hopefully along the way, is really important. So right now, we do have good wayfinding in downtown. I mean, you can get around if you're in a car. And we're not saying that those need to come down, but we need to think about another layer that is really geared towards the pedestrian. That's what we're talking about there. And also parking, continuing to monitor and manage parking supply, consider additional parking to accommodate infill and redevelopment, and really leaning on the downtown parking task force and others to do that is important. Some small area planning is needed, and we hopefully addressed a lot of the big issues, but there's some smaller scale issues that we really need to delve into more in the long term. US 70 and 42 West, 70 Business on the west end and east end, and then also the downtown. You had a downtown master plan done a number of years ago. I think it was back in '06 or something like that. I think some of those recommendations are still relevant. Some have actually come to fruition. But I think that needs to be updated, and we need to expand what we're talking about in terms of downtown, because the western part of downtown has a lot of opportunity, even all the way over to Shotwell Road. And that's what we talk about in the plan is revisiting that plan, but thinking a little bit bigger and dealing with some new issues that probably weren't really hot button issues back then. Updating the zoning code, I mentioned that, talking about open space, housing type, and the downtown overlay. And then downtown, we need to resurvey historic properties. It has been a long time since that is done, and that's something that would be beneficial. Consider changes to that development review process. Pedestrian crossing improvements and parking improvements kind of round out some of the implementation steps for downtown. Public services and infrastructure are a big part of this plan. We work closely with other departments on the water and sewer front, plan for future water and wastewater needs, particularly on the water side. You all have a good handle on improving wastewater capacity, but on the water side, that is a potential limiting factor long-term for Clayton and for Johnson County as a whole. So it's important to work with others and confront that issue. Continue to require annexation to connect to utility system. That's how the town will grow, is through voluntary annexation, and that's how you have control over your future destiny to what's part of your town, so that's important. On the emergency services and public safety side, plan for fire, police, and emergency services, building needs and personnel needs. What we heard when we were talking to the department heads is we need to shift from being reactive to being proactive. Because one of the things that goes unsaid, unless we ask people, is what makes Clayton a great place to live. One is safety. People feel safe. They're not worried about crime. That's a hallmark of that small town ambiance that people love. And we've kind of, we're a little bit behind. So that's something that is really important. So the personnel, we need to be proactive on. And then in terms of buildings and facilities, there's a couple things here: firing range, probably some new police and fire substations, training facilities, things that need to be looked at. And of course, we can look for co-location of facilities and that sort of thing. We kind of know where the needs are. And in some cases, they're the same between fire and police. So how can we be the most efficient and address those? On the stormwater side, we're still working with staff to determine some strategic direction there. We have some recommendations in the plan as it stands, but that's still something we're working with Susan and others on. On the mobility and transportation side of things, there is a right-of-way map. So this map is really looking at the future transportation roadway system of the town, looking at right-of-way needs for existing roads and new location roads. Everything blue on this map really needs to be a 4-lane road, essentially. And then there's some other improvements that are planned for other ones. Roadway recommendations are still being refined, but I think this is a really good step in the right direction of defining, what are the future needs for existing roadways, because we can't wait for NCDOT to widen roads in the future. We need to get the right-of-way incrementally to make it easier. Right-of-way costs are a huge burden for a barrier for future road projects. So what we can do now is really important. Maintenance is a big need. If you don't know how much the town spends on road maintenance, you should, and we probably need to spend more, is kind of what we want to say in this plan, because we're only getting more and more roads that we maintain on a yearly basis, and costs are not getting any cheaper. So that's going to be an increasing amount in the town budget. We need to revise standard cross-sections to make it easy for the town to, engineers to approve things, and also for developers, and refine transit plans in the future. Parks and greenways are a really big thing in Clayton. Clayton is a trail town. We sit at the intersection of the Mountains and Sea Trail and East Coast Greenway. We have the Neuse River Trail that's part of that. We have some really good facilities that connect into downtown. Sam's Branch just got completed, but thinking about long-term, about what the spine network of the greenways are, and also where we probably need some other parks. So we have kind of future greenways shown in the plan, and also some park search areas that we need to be thinking about. And one of the big goals, I think, in the plan is have most residents in Clayton within a 10-minute bike or walk of a park. And we're not there yet, but there's a roadmap to get us there. So the park bond was a great progressive step on the park side of things. So completing those projects is of course first and foremost. Looking at the future, updating the Parks and Rec master plan every 5 years or whenever significant growth has occurred is important. Improving public spaces downtown, extending the Mountains of Sea Trail and improving Neuse River access, protecting and enhancing Clayton's natural resources and water quality, trees, and green infrastructure is all dealt with. So that's kind of the short update of the recommendations. And then looking at the schedule, you see where we are kind of towards the end, but I'm going to blow that up a little bit and kind of talk through the next steps in more detail. We're here at the joint meeting. Planning board is also going to have some discussion on the draft plan at their meeting in next week. We're going to have that public meeting on the 7th. Please attend and tell your friends and neighbors about it. And then the planning board is also going to meet on the 25th. There's a potential recommendation to town council for adoption or recommendation with suggested changes. And then the town council is going to have 2 meetings to review the plan. One is the public hearing on November 1st, ideally, and then potential adoption or adoption with changes on November 5th. So that's kind of what that looks like moving forward. And here we come to kind of the discussion point of the presentation, and really I think it would be good to hear what major issues should be addressed, and either things that you saw addressed in the plan and you like, or some things we need to change tact on or look into further. It might just be a question like, how is this addressed, and we can do the best to answer that. Then also I want you to think about priorities. You know, we can't do everything as a staff. Staff can't do everything immediately, and the capital improvement plan and the budget obviously is limited. So we're going to have to think about priorities moving forward. So. So anyone got any priorities that they hope are addressed or think are addressed or want to be addressed?
All right, I'll go first. Any questions or comments from council?
I have some, but you go first, Mayor.
No, go ahead.
Jake, you mentioned that on open space, you're recommending a minimum of 12%. Has any consideration been given to a max amount? And if so, what would that be?
So the minimum, I think, would be for certain zoning districts. So it wouldn't necessarily be across the board. So if maybe for some higher density zoning districts, you don't have it, but a minimum of 10% in some of your base, more suburban kind of single family home districts is what's recommended. And then in terms of a max, I don't think that we would say that there was a max. There could be incentives, really that open space subdivision option to get a little bit more, get like 10% or even up to 30% in some of the more lower density areas, and provide some flexibility. Because really what you're doing with that open space subdivision is giving folks flexibility for some attached product, and then also for some narrower lots or smaller lots. So hopefully that could be kind of coincident with a little bit more open space. Some of that could be improved in terms of common greens or fields or parks, but some could just be, preserving steep slopes or areas adjacent to streams or greenways and that sort of thing.
Okay. You also mentioned ways to possibly promote and incentivize residential and mixed-use projects. What suggestions would you have to be able to do that sort of thing, if any?
That was specifically about downtown. And we all know that working downtown is a little bit more difficult, right? Because you have a lot of existing development. You have streets and other infrastructure that are there, and some of it's aging, and a lot of downtown was built prior to a lot of the requirements we have today in terms of infrastructure standards, particularly on the stormwater side. A lot of downtown was built prior to any requirement for stormwater infrastructure. A lot of downtown was built prior to any requirement for parking, right? And so those are things that could be seen as barriers to new development. Requiring a suburban approach to stormwater management, or the same amount of parking as you would a Walmart out on the edge of town. And that's where I think there needs to be a slightly different tact towards development in their downtown, and you've all been talking about that. I think, recently you've talked about kind of should we require the same amount of parking and stuff downtown. That's what I'm talking about, is there's specific barriers to doing good things downtown that I think most people would agree with. And if we can make it work, then we need to think about, is there a public-private partnership for some of these things? So for parking, is there a public-private partnership opportunity? Is there a way that we can look at stormwater and do some regional detention? And this is what Holly Springs recently did in their downtown, is they did a study and created a park that also doubles as stormwater retention for a segment of their downtown. And that is an incentive for a business or developer to locate and do something downtown, because they don't have to deal with stormwater in this particular area, or it's offset in some way. So there's a lot of different methods of doing that, but that's what I'm talking about, is thinking outside the box. And you have a lot of smart people on staff that are willing to do this and capable of doing this. And it's a partnership too with the private sector, because they have probably looked at a number of opportunities and they know the barriers. And I think, how can we work together and develop an approach that works for everybody?
You kind of touched on this with respect to improved parking in the downtown area. Any other recommendations?
Well, parking's a big one. I think there's also some low-hanging fruit in the downtown. The pedestrian facilities and crossings, particularly, are something that I think could be, addressed. I think pedestrian actuated signals, improved, repainted crosswalks, continuing to fill gaps in sidewalks. And some of those might be paired with some vehicular improvements too. I think about Robertson Road, and that's one thing that we talked about. We need a sidewalk, but hey, we also kind of need a turn lane, in there. So that's the kind of thing that it's going to take leadership from the town to make that happen. It's not going to be on DOT's radar. They can be a partner with it, and they'll, if the town's willing to step up and lead the way.
The last question I have does deal with DOT. oftentimes, in my experience, they seem to be somewhat difficult to deal with on state-owned thoroughfares. A great example of that would be Main Street. We do have a particular pedestrian crossing that was actually marked, but it took us probably, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it took well over a year to be able to get that approved. Any thoughts about how that could be done more expeditiously?
Well, you got to think short-term and long-term. And short-term, partnering with DOT is really the best option. Long-term, I think there's some big conversations on the future of Main Street. And would the town be willing to take over ownership and maintenance of Main Street long-term? And that's paired with, probably some investment in Main Street in order to kind of accomplish some other goals that you have for that segment of road, make it a little more pedestrian friendly, underground, some power lines and that sort of thing. So short term, I think that's where you go. You partnership with DOT and working on these crossing improvements, being willing to come up to the table with matching funds for those things. Long term, I think you all need to be having a conversation about, what is the future of Main Street.
Okay. And just a comment, I want to thank you and your team, and also want to thank the committee that's been working on this for quite a while. I think it's produced some really, really positive information, and I'm really excited about where we're headed with this particular project. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, anyone else? Mr. Thompson?
I just have a few comments. First of all, I am impressed that there was some emphasis on preserving residential downtown. I think, one thing that's made me probably, it's been most disappointing to me over the years, it seems like every time one of our elders in the community passes away, their house gets turned into a business. And, I think there's a healthy mix in there somewhere that we've got to find that sweet spot so that we're not converting all of downtown into business. I think the second thing is our right-of-way acquisition, and I like the map that you put up about, what should be 4-lane roads. I like that a lot, and I think that's something that we need to keep on our radar, and we need to be proactive in working on. I think that's something we can do. We can't sit back and wait on DOT to improve roads all we want, but when the need's already there, and they say it's going to be a few years before we can do, what can we be doing in the meantime? And I think that right-of-way acquisition, movement on things like that, that's something we can do. I'm impressed with that. Obviously, public safety infrastructure, I think you hit the nail on the head. We're already behind in personnel. And as we add population, we've got to really keep beefing up personnel on the public safety side. And with personnel come facilities, because we can't continue to hire people and not have somewhere for them to report to work, or have too many people under one roof. Pedestrian wayfinding, crosswalks, I think that's got to be one of our big ticket items. Always on the radar. I think, I've talked to them blue in the face about crosswalks until I'm tired of talking about crosswalks. And we're grossly behind in that, and that's something we need to continue to work on. And that's all.
Awesome. Thank you, sir. Mr. Holden?
I'm a little concerned sitting here. What's the population downtown? 2,500? 3,000? What's the population of Clayton? 26,300. The way I see this report is primarily about downtown. There's very little said about anything outside of downtown. And I think it all should be included. We got issues outside of downtown, and I don't see much in here about those issues.
All right. Anyone else?
Yeah, I just have one question. I know that you talked a little bit about mixing the housing types and things like that. So this question is more posed towards like, affordability for our low-income residents. So how do you think that would kind of impact them with the updates to the UDC?
Can we go back to Mr. Holder? Is there an area of town that you're most concerned about? Because I think there is a lot in the plan, in areas other than downtown, and maybe we can kind of answer some of those questions or include something else.
I think he's asking, were there particular areas that you have concern or an example so they could have a little something to
We have
move?
we have sidewalks that go and stop. If you're gonna go on down these sidewalks, you go out in the street and walk. Okay? There's one on Front Street. Sidewalk goes fine, and then there's two big trees there. Sidewalk stops, people got to walk out in the street.
Yeah. So the edges, let's say, connection from, new area to growing areas into where we do have infrastructure.
Street. We got gaps all around town where we do not have sidewalks completed. That should be a priority.
We do have if you look in the plan, there's a downtown improvements graphic that talks about some of those key connections into town where the sidewalk ends, right? and that's, I think that's really important is, how do you make those missing connections, not just downtown, but also in neighborhoods that are almost in walking distance to a facility. It could be downtown, it could be a school, it could be a park, and there are some recommendations in there about that.
I just want to make sure we understand that 80% of the voting population in this town lives outside of downtown.
Yep. So that was, and a lot of the chapters are about those other areas too. There's one chapter on downtown because we do think it's a focus, but there is a lot of emphasis on other areas too. Okay, can we go back to your question real quick, Avery?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, do you want to say something?
I was just going to say, sir, on sidewalks downtown, the pedestrian plan is underway as well, and throughout the plan, it does point to the pedestrian plan, and that is really, it's an NCDOT funded study that's looking comprehensively townwide at connections and really focusing on connections to parks, connections to school, missing links, connections into downtown, so really trying to connect all parts of downtown. So that steering committee met last night for a second time, and we're hoping sometime either Q1 or Q2 or early Q2 that'll be ready to be able to come forward to town council for adoption. So I definitely want to make sure from sidewalk and pedestrian safety standpoint, those works are underway and kind of running concurrently with this.
All right, sorry, Mr. Everett, did you want to restate your question?
Sure. I know that you were kind of talking about the different housing types and what the new update would bring to us. So my question would be, how would that affect our low-income residents with the update to the UDC? Or how would that impact them in a positive way?
Well, I think that one thing that we heard when we asked people what makes Clayton attractive, what do you value about Clayton? One thing that people said was affordability. And that's something that people value, and that's something that keeps people here. That's why they're here, and we want that to remain true, down the line, because we want those residents that have been here for a while an opportunity to stay, and that's important. But we also have a housing shortage. That was evident too when we're talking to folks. There's just not enough housing of any type. So that gets into anything from executive housing to higher end housing to entry level housing to rental housing. I mean, there is a lack of housing at all levels. And that is something that was very clear. So what I think the approach that we're taking and recommendations in terms of housing variety is addressing this kind of lack of housing at all levels. And I think one of the things that's important when you look at Clayton and other places too in the southeast is we have a lot of single-family homes in single-family neighborhoods. You all have a lot. And then we also have a lot of apartments either come in that were built during the 80s and 90s and that sort of thing. But we don't really have a lot of anything in the middle. Right, so that includes patio homes, and the Village of East Walk's a good example of that, or townhomes, or duplexes and triplexes. Those things that are a little bit more affordable than your typical single-family home on a larger lot. And I think that balance, finding that balance, that right balance for Clayton, is something that we're trying to do. Is have a little bit more balance than we've had. But also put some boundaries on it and kind of make it appropriate for the different areas of Clayton. So that's what I think that we're trying to do is address that affordability by providing a little bit more variety maybe and encouraging it in the right places than we currently do. Right now, it's really hard to actually develop anything other than single-family homes in most of Clayton. There's a special use permit process no matter where you're doing that. So if you're trying to build townhomes, there's really no incentive to put townhomes where they probably should go. Because you have to go through a special use permit process anyway. So why spend more money on a piece of land when you're gonna have the same uphill battle? What we're saying is, in some places, that housing mix makes complete sense, and we should make it easier to do some things that make sense. And that's how I think how we're addressing it.
Okay.
All right, anyone else? Mr. Bunn?
I just have one question for you. In your survey, you rank small town lifestyle as number one in the rating. Can you drill down on what is small town lifestyle a little bit? You don't have to get too deep with it, but I mean, are you talking like a Barney and Andy type situation? Or?
This is a topic that actually the steering committee talked about a lot. We actually, I don't know if y'all remember it, but we actually asked the question on Facebook at one time, and people, commented and told us what they thought that meant. What does small town feel mean? I think was the question, and it means different things for different people. There's a lot of range there, and I think even in the comments you saw that range, anything from kind of having a safe place to live, to being able to walk down the street and know people, events, and the downtown events were really big. That's what a lot of people pointed to, like the Christmas parade and the shindig, stuff like that. And then the steering committee talked a lot about it too. What does that mean? What does a small town mean? Are we a small town anymore? Do we want to be? And I think they talked about it, and I think there was an understanding that Clayton is growing, and it's going to grow, and we can't hold on to, the 6,000 person Clayton, right? Like that's long gone. But we can keep aspects of it, and we can keep that feeling. We can keep that feeling of Clayton as home, and we didn't brand the plan like we did last time. Last time it was Clayton was big, bold, innovative growth. But if there was one theme for this plan, it was think Clayton, think home. And there's a place for folks that have been here a long time, and there's going to be a place in the future, but it's going to have that small town feel in the future too.
Thank you.
Awesome. Anyone else? All right, if not, I'm going to turn it over to our chair for planning board and for question and comments from your board. Or you.
Testing, okay. Andrea Archer, planning board chair. I had a couple comments and then we can turn it over to the board. You mentioned a couple different topics, and emergency services and public works jumps to mind where staff was involved with some of the input on this, but just curious, does this plan go out staff-wide for staff input as well? I would think that they're kind of our expertise on some of these areas.
Yeah, there's going to be a, concurrent review. I mean, I think staff has already seen parts of it, but the draft plan that you all have is going to be circulated, and we'll get staff comments and hopefully, address those before you see the final draft that you're going to be voting on in a month from now.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. And then one kind of specific question, maybe I'm getting a little in the weeds here, but I was just curious when it was talking about the housing types, because I know housing came up quite a bit on the survey that was sent out to the community, as well as you just hear about it a lot out in town. And there were, I can't remember the exact designations, but something along the lines of low, medium, and high for the different residential designations. Were those industry standards, those percentages, or are those based on something specific to our town and our plan? Or I was just curious where the numbers and the details came in for those.
Mm-hmm. Those are recommendations kind of customized to Clayton. And right now it's at the policy level, right? Like this is what this plan is, it's policy. And hopefully it can guide development design and conditional rezonings in the future. So, just as it stands, approval with this plan, it will hopefully guide the design of new development. There is another step that could be done, and it's to actually codify in the UDC those different percentages or whatever. And a good example of that is Huntersville does that. They have very specific percentage of attached unit caps for different zoning areas based on where they are and their plan. So the percentages we recommended are different. They're customized for Clayton based on the future land use map and the character of different areas and that sort of thing. But their approach was kind of an elegant approach to allowing flexibility in terms of lot size and housing product, but also kind of balancing it with kind of where it is in the world and neighbors and character of different areas.
Okay, thank you. I know just my 2 cents, I liked the way that looked. It was very kind of clear and organized, but I could also see there being just some room for debate there, or interpretation. So I was just wanting to know kind of where that came from. Yeah,
and I think that's if you do go to the next step and kind of codify something in the Unified Development Code, there's going to be more discussion needed, at the planning board level and staff and town council as well, and those could change, right? They could evolve, and that's fine.
One last thing, and I'll stop and pass it around. You started this off with just kind of asking our priorities and what actions would be associated with that. And I noticed today as I was reading through it and when you were talking, a lot of things come up that people are worried about in the community. The ones I was noticing, our relationship with the schools and how we work with them in terms of growth and all that. Traffic flow, open space, emergency services, utilities. So I was curious what I noticed in the plan. There is a section for the implementation plan, because those are all my priorities, I'm sure, for all of us. And it's kind of just like, where do you even start to weigh those out? And I'm sure that's a council level thing, but I was just wondering how you even begin that process of prioritization and an action plan.
Yeah. Well, thanks for that segue. This is like a snapshot of what that implementation plan is going to look like. Each goal is going to kind of have an implementation step, at least one, on something that can be done, and responsible parties and time frame. That time frame, I think we're working with staff on what's realistic in terms of needs and that sort of thing, and it's going to come down to budget season every year, really. You can't do everything. I think we're going to point out kind of near-term, midterm, long-term needs, but if something becomes a priority for this council next year, just because we have it as a midterm need doesn't mean they can't pull it forward and make it happen sooner. I think we're trying to provide some concrete steps, and we're working with kind of staff and based on what we hear tonight, and then at the public, we're going to kind of develop a draft implementation plan. But that plan is implemented by staff and the council, and really on a yearly basis. And there's going to be things that are the plan is not necessarily going to go into a lot of detail. That the CIP, the capital improvement plan, and those budget petitions every year are really going to have a lot more granular, but at least we can kind of point out some things in this plan that, hopefully we can accomplish over the next 5 years in a broad sense.
Thank you very much. On that note, I will open it up to other members of the planning board. If you would like to question and comment.
Can you turn that mic up a little bit? I catch you about every other word. I hear the rest of the time, that one you cannot hear.
I'm no good with the technology. How's that? Just got to put it really close to, ooh, there. Okay, thank you.
Awesome. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
All right. Jay, great job, great presentation from Stuart. I really think that the institutional knowledge you have from the years that you've been working with the town is really paying off at this point. I like what you presented as a whole. I know I'll probably have more comments at the planning board meeting, but the one thing that I want to say is to the council, I think this is going to be up to you guys to lead us into the future. If we don't take this plan and do the UDC upright, if we rewrite, excuse me, if we don't give staff what they need to succeed, if we expect for Ben, who I've not even met yet, so I'm not calling you by your first name, but haven't even met him yet, if we don't give him the resources that he needs, and I believe, Ben, didn't you come from a long-range planning background? So, we really need that. We need to embrace our consultants, and we need to have somebody that's sitting here worried about what Clayton looks like 20 and 30 years from now every day, instead of it being every year or 2 years. And one thing that I can say, because I've got a unique perspective coming from a previously elected council person to a planning board member and a downtown business owner and a developer, is that these guys' staff are so busy that they can do the best they can, but they can't be on the lookout for everything that needs to be looked at long-range planning-wise. And there's going to need to be a commitment from the town council, budget-wise, so these guys can do a better job. And I really love the consultants. And the one thing that I've learned in my business is that I need to go to people that are smarter than me and ask them for assistance and help. And I think that, Jake and his presentation tonight, it shows, he's got, a 10-year relationship or more with the town. So I think that's really paying off. And I just really want to say to you guys that at budget time, when the manager brings you a new budget and he's asking for stuff, or Ben says, I can't use my long-range planner brain because I'm so busy with the people that are in front of me, or I've had 57 pre-application meetings this month, and I've only got 160 hours of time, and each one of those application meetings took 2 hours. That's, it goes to show. So if you look at the growth that we've had and the growth that's going to continue to come, the only way we're going to be able to keep up is for continued commitment from you guys. So that's a real big thing that I want to say. Let you marinate on for the next few weeks.
I just want to thank you for your presentation. In my 3 years on the planning board, and as my fellow planning board members will confirm, Goal LU3 has been my major concern with the town of Clayton for the past 3 years, looking at, and I've made this statement, everything that we've approved for housing and everything that's being built currently, except for one small subdivision, has been what most would deem entry-level or workforce housing. And I just didn't see the various price points. And my concern, looking at Clayton and James and I've had this discussion, 20 years from now, as these individuals move into the workforce entry-level housing, as their incomes increase and their wealth increases over the years, we have nothing on on the horizon for them to move to stay in the city limits of Clayton. That was my concern. If you're a growing town, you have to look at the diversity of housing, because right now we're in a serious quagmire. We've built so much entry-level housing in the past 2 years, overwhelming amount of entry-level housing. Even in townhouses, which has been the overwhelming single-family housing in Clayton, you can have various price points in townhouses. You can go larger, 2,000, 2,500 square feet, two-car garages, larger landscapes. So I appreciate you being forthright in your recommendation. I know it's up to the town to take, but I just implore the town to understand. Also, if you're looking at economic development, businesses are going to, especially retail establishments, they're going to look at your literacy and your income levels, making decisions on some of these large retail establishments, the employers, how they evaluate. It's just not traffic count that's taken into effect, and it's just not the number of people, but they want to know that median family income. But if you only have entry-level housing, you're only going to have particularly one level of median family income. So a decision as we grow is, what do we want Clayton to look like in 20 years, not just in the number of people, but in the education levels and in the median family income. All of those decisions have to be taken into account. So I really appreciate the presentation, because it's just been harping on me that it's like we've been so concentrated on increasing people that we had a fatal flaw we didn't understand. You get these people in, what are you going to do when it's time for them to upgrade their house? They have nowhere to go in the city of Clayton. They may have a Clayton post office address outside of the city of Clayton. That's not benefiting the Clayton tax base.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say two things kind of in support of that. One is you'll have a great opportunity here at Clayton. The quality of life that you're able to provide, the amount of convenience that you can provide, the culture, the access to all that's here is something that is unparalleled in the Triangle in Johnson County. But it comes down to product. So on the higher end, whether that's executive housing or how, and that can be executive single-family housing, but also a really well-designed other type of product, maybe it's townhomes, whatever, for that baby boomer that wants to move out of the house that they built 20 years ago. You're in the driver's seat. But you have to provide that option in the town of Clayton, and you will get people that will take advantage of it. So that's, I think, a really good point.
All right. Anyone else? Okay, great. Mr. Thompson.
I just want to really say I appreciate what Mr. Moore said. I think he's hit the nail on the head that we have been approving a lot of entry-level new homes, but as folks advance in their careers and their lives, it's almost like we're giving them lots of places to start out in Clayton, but where are they going to go as they advance? They're going to have to move to a home that is 3 or 5 miles outside of town to live in a nicer home. And we need to do something about that, and I really appreciate those remarks.
Yeah, and I mean, I think there's some recommendations in the plan about quality design that I think that would get you there. I mean, you want to provide something that people want to move into their second and third home, and they, you don't want them to move the flowers, so.
You said that.
That's what we're thinking.
He basically took the words right out of my mouth. For the record. Mr. Grants.
I too want to thank you, Mr. Moore, for that comment, because I agree with you. I wanted to address a comment that Mr. Lipscomb made with respect to having adequate staff. I do believe that this council certainly recognized that situation as we were going through the last budget period. You may not be aware of this, but we authorized an additional 36 new positions in the town. And I'm not saying that that gets us up to snuff, but that is, I don't want to say that was an unprecedented move, but it was a very significant move. I don't recall in my tenure allowing or permitting or authorizing, however you'd like to put it, that many positions to be filled. And we're not there yet, but I certainly think we're headed in the right direction, and I appreciate your comments about that because you're absolutely right. It's extremely important.
I wasn't aware of that, I appreciate that. I'm looking at specific positions.
I understand.
And not necessarily, because I know the council's had a good commitment, but the commitment to long-range planning, which I don't know all about, that's something that's extremely important, and none of our other positions are looking at. And I'm still big on embracing contractual services. I'll say something now that Rich Butler through is computer hacking, but landscaping now along Highway 70, I think is not at the same level it had been in the past. And I don't know if we've taken that all in-house or we've changed contractors, but that's one thing that every time I ride underneath that bridge on Glenmore Street, I look at it and I just think, so, not bringing anything specific, but I'm going to throw that out there.
Well, I mean, I think, I think we talked about gateways in the plan too. And 70 Business is a prime gateway into town, and it's going to be. And I think that's something that we had some recommendations in there about looking at 70 Business, particularly in the key gateways. And I think there's some good precedents to look at. Hickory did an Inspiring Spaces plan. Probably about, I guess it was about 6 years ago. And I had an opportunity to work on it when I was at Land Design, and it's really inspiring. Take a look at it, but it was followed by a number of kind of public improvement projects. Some of those having to do with gateways and art and landscaping and some other investments too in the downtown to kind of change Hickory's brand from, because they were losing population a lot and they wanted to become, so you don't have that problem, right? Like people are going to come here, but it does address that public realm improvement. So the right-of-ways are a key public realm. That is how people view your town, like it or not, mostly. I mean, yes, there's going to be people on bikes and walking, but through the car is that's your how you're gonna be seen by most people. So yeah.
All right, anyone else? All right, well, I too want to express my appreciation to everyone for your participation this evening. I'm very pleased with what I have heard. I do want to just reiterate, I am pretty strongly in favor of making sure we adhere to the proposed timelines, because I think this is a matter for the town of Clayton that needs to be dealt with, relatively quickly. And I'm loving the timeline that we have established, and hopefully the planning board will be able to decipher through a good amount of this material and make a, strong recommendation back to the town council on the timeline as it's been presented this evening. And, I think that we have a lot going on in this town, and, if we want to think about what is it going to look like 20 years from now, we have to start today, and back in the day, when, for example, James Lipscomb and I were on the town council, you always had these studies that the town did, and we learned a lot, and it sat on a shelf. And because that was the norm, like it happened in every city and town across North Carolina. But nowadays, when you have all the possibilities in the world, like the town of Clayton has, really is time to take that information and breathe life into it continuously. Because I think to the point being made that, long-range planning isn't just something you do twice a year. or every other year. It's something that should be a continuation and a part of the process week by week. So that's pretty much where the mayor is on this. So is there any further questions or comments? All right, so from my perspective, I will entertain a motion to adjourn. We have a motion and a second to adjourn. Any other discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Return to the planning board. Thank you, everybody.